On a desolate country road, a tiny German Shepherd puppy sits alone in the rain, his cries echoing through the empty landscape. When a car finally stops, something extraordinary happens. The puppy recognizes the woman who steps out, and his reaction will leave you speechless. This is a story about love, loss, and a bond so powerful that not even abandonment could break it. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about a dog's capacity to remember, forgive, and love unconditionally. The windshield wipers of Sarah Mitchell's sedan fought against the relentless autumn rain as she navigated the winding country road back to her hometown of Cedar Falls, Montana. After 3 years working as a veterinary assistant in Seattle, she was finally returning to visit her ailing grandmother, a trip she'd postponed too many times. As her headlights cut through the growing darkness, something small and dark caught her attention on the roadside ahead. Sarah slowed down, squinting through the rain-streaked glass. Her heart sank as she realized what she was seeing. A tiny German Shepherd puppy, no more than 8 weeks old, sitting motionless beside a discarded cardboard box. "Oh my God," she whispered, pulling over immediately. The moment Sarah stepped out of her car, something incredible happened. The puppy's ears perked up and he began making sounds she'd never heard before. Not quite barking, not quite whimpering, but something that sounded almost human, like crying. The little creature struggled to his feet on shaky legs and stumbled toward her, his tail wagging frantically despite his obvious distress. What happened next defied all logic. As Sarah knelt down, the puppy launched himself into her arms with a desperate urgency, as if he had been waiting specifically for her. His tiny body trembled uncontrollably, but it wasn't just from the cold. The sounds he made grew more intense, heartbreaking cries that seemed to come from somewhere deep within his soul. "Hey there, little guy," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking as she wrapped her veterinary jacket around the soaked puppy. "It's okay now." But the puppy's reaction was unlike anything she'd experienced in her 3 years of animal care. He pressed his small head against her chest, and his cries intensified rather than subsided. It was as if he was trying to tell her something urgent, something important that only she could understand. Sarah examined the soggy cardboard box and found it completely empty except for a small, worn blanket that smelled faintly of something familiar. She couldn't quite place it, but there was something about this puppy's behavior that stirred a memory she couldn't quite grasp. The rain continued to pour as she lifted the trembling puppy and carried him to her car. As she settled him on the passenger seat, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Around the puppy's tiny neck was a faded red collar, one that looked remarkably similar to one she remembered from years ago. "No," she breathed, her hands shaking as she examined the collar more closely. "It can't be." The puppy looked up at her with striking blue eyes, eyes that seemed far too knowing for such a young animal. Those eyes held a mixture of hope, recognition, and something that looked distinctly like forgiveness. As Sarah started her car, the puppy curled up on the seat, finally quiet for the first time since she'd found him. But his small paws remained extended toward her, as if he was afraid she might disappear again. What Sarah didn't know was that this chance encounter on a rainy Montana road was about to uncover a truth so heartbreaking, it would change both their lives forever. The drive to Cedar Falls took on a surreal quality as Sarah found herself stealing glances at the small passenger beside her. The puppy had fallen into an exhausted sleep, but even in slumber, his tiny paws twitched restlessly, and soft whimpers escaped his lips. Every few minutes he would open his eyes to check if she was still there, then settle back down with what seemed like relief. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to make sense of what had happened on that road. The red collar, those knowing eyes, the way the puppy had reacted to her, it all pointed to something impossible. 3 years ago, before she left for Seattle, she had owned a German Shepherd named Atlas. He had been her closest companion, her emotional support through her parents' difficult divorce and her struggle to find her place in the world. But Atlas had died in a tragic accident just weeks before her departure to Seattle. At least, that's what she had been told. "Impossible," she whispered to herself, but her voice lacked conviction. As they reached the outskirts of Cedar Falls, Sarah made an impulsive decision. Instead of heading straight to her grandmother's house, she turned toward Maple Street, toward the house where she had grown up, where Atlas had spent his days playing in the backyard and his nights curled up at the foot of her bed. The puppy stirred as if sensing they were close to somewhere significant. His eyes opened and he sat up, pressing his nose against the window with an urgency that made Sarah's heart skip. When she pulled into the driveway of her childhood home, now occupied by new owners, the puppy's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He began the same heartbreaking cries from the road, pawing at the window and looking between Sarah and the house with desperate recognition. "This is crazy," Sarah muttered, but she couldn't deny what she was witnessing. Mrs. Henderson, her elderly former neighbor, emerged from the house next door, squinting through the rain. When she recognized Sarah's car, her face lit up with surprise, but when she saw the puppy, her expression changed to something much more complex. Guilt, sadness, and shock all rolled into one. Sarah? Sarah Mitchell? What are you doing here, honey? Mrs. Henderson called out, hurrying over despite the rain. Mrs. Henderson, this is going to sound strange, but I found this puppy on Route 9, and he's acting like he knows me. He's acting like he knows this place. Sarah lifted the puppy, who immediately began crying again at the sight of Mrs. Henderson. The older woman's face went pale. "Oh dear," she whispered, reaching out tentatively to touch the puppy's head. "Oh dear, oh dear. What is it? Do you know something about this puppy?" Mrs. Henderson glanced around nervously, as if checking to see if anyone was listening. "Sarah, honey, there's something I need to tell you. Something about Atlas. Something I should have told you 3 years ago, but your parents, they made me promise." The rain seemed to intensify as Sarah felt the world tilt around her. "What about Atlas? He died, Mrs. Henderson. He was hit by a car." "No, honey." Mrs. Henderson's voice was barely above a whisper. "Atlas didn't die. Your parents, they gave him away the day before you left for Seattle. They said it would be easier for you to start fresh without him. They said it was for the best." The puppy in Sarah's arms let out another heartbreaking cry, as if he understood every word being spoken. Sarah felt as though the ground had given way beneath her feet. The rain continued to pour around them, but she barely noticed it anymore. The puppy in her arms trembled, not from cold now, but as if he could sense the emotional earthquake happening in the woman who held him. That's impossible," Sarah stammered, though even as she said the words, pieces of a painful puzzle began falling into place. The hurried goodbye with Atlas the night before her departure. Her parents' insistence that she shouldn't look back when the car came to take her to the airport. The way they'd quickly changed the subject whenever she asked about visiting Atlas's grave. Mrs. Henderson's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, dear. Your parents swore me to secrecy. They said Atlas would be better off with a family who could give him more attention, and that you'd be better off starting fresh in Seattle without the burden of worrying about him." "Burden?" The word came out like a broken whisper. "He wasn't a burden. He was my best friend." The puppy lifted his small head and licked Sarah's cheek as if offering comfort. The gesture was so familiar, so reminiscent of the way Atlas used to comfort her during her darkest moments, that it took her breath away. "Mrs. Henderson, who did they give him to? Please, I need to know." The elderly woman wrung her hands nervously. "The Johnsons, about 30 miles north of here. They have a big farm, lots of space. Your parents thought it was best for everyone. And this puppy? Sarah, Atlas was already 2 years old when your parents gave him away. If this little one is Atlas's offspring." Mrs. Henderson trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air between them. Sarah's mind reeled with the possibilities. If Atlas had bred at the Johnson farm, if this puppy was his son, it could explain the incredible recognition, the familiar behaviors, even the way the little one seemed to know exactly how to comfort her. "I need to see him," Sarah said suddenly, her voice gaining strength. "I need to see Atlas." Mrs. Henderson looked uncertain. "Honey, it's been 3 years. I don't know if—" "He's still alive, isn't he?" Sarah's voice cracked with hope and fear in equal measure. "As far as I know, yes. But Sarah, you need to prepare yourself. 3 years is a long time for a dog. He might not remember you. He might have bonded with his new family." The puppy in Sarah's arms whimpered softly and nuzzled against her neck, as if disagreeing with Mrs. Henderson's assessment. His small body radiated warmth and an inexplicable sense of knowing that defied his young age. "Can you call them? The Johnsons, please?" Mrs. Henderson hesitated for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Come inside, dear. You're both soaked to the bone." As they hurried toward Mrs. Henderson's house, Sarah felt a mixture of anticipation and dread building in her chest. The puppy seemed to sense her emotional turmoil and pressed closer to her, offering silent support in the way that only dogs can. Inside the warm kitchen, Mrs. Henderson picked up her phone with trembling fingers. As she dialed the number, Sarah realized that in the next few minutes, she might discover whether the love she'd shared with Atlas had been as deep and unbreakable as she'd always believed, or whether she was chasing shadows and wishful thinking. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a gruff male voice answered. "Johnson Farm." "Mr. Johnson, this is Helen Henderson from Cedar Falls. I'm calling about a German Shepherd that was placed with your family about 3 years ago. Atlas." Sarah held her breath, clutching the puppy closer to her chest. The little one seemed to sense the importance of this moment and remained perfectly still, his bright blue eyes fixed on Sarah's face as if reading her emotions. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mr. Johnson's voice came back, it carried a weight that made Sarah's heart sink. "Well, I'll be. Mrs. Henderson, what's this about? Nobody's asked about that dog in years. The original owner is here with me, Sarah Mitchell. She's just discovered that her parents gave Atlas away without her knowledge. She thought he had died." Another pause, longer this time. Sarah could hear muffled voices in the background as if Mr. Johnson was conferring with someone else. "Ma'am, I'm real sorry to hear about that misunderstanding, but Atlas... Well, Atlas has been through quite a journey since he came to us." Sarah's voice barely functioned as she leaned toward the phone. "Is he alive? Please just tell me if he's alive." "He's alive, but Miss Mitchell, you need to understand something. That dog never adjusted to life here. For 3 years he's been different. Melancholy, you might say. Won't bond with anyone on the farm, spends most of his time looking down the road like he's waiting for someone who ain't coming." The puppy in Sarah's arms made a soft sound, almost like he understood the conversation. Mrs. Henderson reached over and gently stroked his small head. "We've been good to him," Mr. Johnson continued, "but anyone with eyes can see that dog's heart belongs somewhere else. The vet says there's nothing physically wrong with him, but he's been pining for 3 solid years." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she absorbed this information. Her loyal Atlas waiting for her all this time. The guilt was overwhelming, but beneath it was a fierce determination. "Mr. Johnson, I want to see him. I want to bring him home." "Well, now, I reckon that might be the best thing for all concerned. But you should know, Atlas, he's got himself a legacy here. Found himself a mate about a year ago, a beautiful German shepherd named Luna. They had a litter of pups about 8 weeks back." Sarah's eyes widened as she looked down at the puppy in her arms. 8 weeks? "Yes, ma'am. Prettiest little things you ever saw. We found homes for most of them, but there was one." His voice trailed off. "One what?" "One that went missing 3 days ago. Little male with his daddy's eyes and his daddy's spirit. Darndest thing. He disappeared right around the time Luna was taking the pups on their first real exploration outside the property. We've been searching everywhere." The puppy looked up at Sarah with those impossibly knowing blue eyes, and suddenly everything clicked into place. The recognition, the desperate cries, the way he'd seemed to be waiting specifically for her on that dark road. "Mr. Johnson," Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, "did this missing puppy have a red collar?" "Why, yes, he did. Little red collar that Luna always insisted on putting on him. Said it made him look handsome like his daddy." "How did you?" Sarah's laugh was part joy, part disbelief. "Because I'm holding him. I found him on Route 9 and he led me home." The silence on the phone stretched for a long moment before Mr. Johnson's amazed voice came through. "Well, I'll be damned. That little one traveled 30 miles to find you. It's like he knew exactly where to go." The drive to the Johnson farm felt both eternal and far too short. Sarah's hands trembled on the steering wheel as she navigated the winding country roads, the puppy, who she'd started calling Scout in her mind, alert and excited in the passenger seat. It was as if he knew they were heading somewhere momentous. Mrs. Henderson had insisted on coming along for moral support, and Sarah was grateful for the company. The elderly woman kept glancing between Sarah and Scout, marveling at the incredible chain of events that had brought them all together. 30 miles, Mrs. Henderson repeated for the 3rd time. "That little one walked 30 miles to find you." As they turned onto the gravel road leading to the Johnson farm, Scout began to whimper with excitement. His small tail wagged furiously, and he pressed his nose against the window, recognizing the familiar territory. The Johnson farm stretched across rolling green hills, with a large red barn and several smaller outbuildings scattered across the property. As Sarah's car crunched up the gravel driveway, she could see a figure emerging from the barn. A tall, weathered man in overalls who could only be Mr. Johnson. But it was the large German shepherd beside him that made Sarah's heart stop. Even from a distance, even after 3 years, she would know that silhouette anywhere. Atlas stood perfectly still next to Mr. Johnson, his head raised high, his ears perked forward. And then, as if sensing something on the wind, his entire body went rigid. Sarah parked the car and sat for a moment, her hands shaking. This was it. The moment she'd been dreaming of for 3 years, the moment she'd thought would never come. "You ready, honey?" Mrs. Henderson asked gently. Sarah nodded, scooped up Scout, and stepped out of the car. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Atlas let out a sound Sarah had never heard him make before. a deep, guttural cry that seemed to come from his very soul. He broke away from Mr. Johnson and began running toward her, his powerful legs eating up the distance between them. "Atlas!" Sarah called out, her voice breaking. The reunion was everything Sarah had dreamed of and more. Atlas reached her and reared up on his hind legs, placing his massive paws on her shoulders. He was bigger than she remembered, his coat thicker and more mature, but his eyes, those beautiful brown eyes she'd looked into every day for 2 years, were exactly the same. He covered her face with kisses, whimpering and crying in a way that sounded heartbreakingly human. It was as if 3 years of separation, longing and patient waiting were pouring out of him all at once. "I'm so sorry," Sarah sobbed into his fur. "I'm so sorry, boy. I never would have left you. I never knew." Scout, still in her arms, reached out with his tiny paw to touch his father's face. Atlas immediately shifted his attention to his son, gently licking the puppy and making soft rumbling sounds deep in his chest. It was clear that he understood. Somehow, his little one had succeeded where he had failed. Scout had found their person and brought her home. Mr. Johnson approached slowly, his own eyes misty. "I've never seen anything like it," he said quietly. 3 years and it's like you never left. That dog's been waiting for this moment every single day." Mrs. Luna, a beautiful silver German shepherd, emerged from the barn with 2 remaining puppies at her side. She watched the reunion with calm, understanding eyes, as if she too knew that this was how things were meant to be. The paperwork took less than an hour, but the emotional impact would last a lifetime. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, a kind couple in their 60s, shared stories of Atlas's unwavering loyalty and his mysterious sadness that had persisted for 3 years. They spoke of how he would sit by the farm's gate every evening at sunset, looking down the road as if expecting someone to arrive. "We knew he was waiting for you," Mrs. Johnson said, watching as Atlas refused to leave Sarah's side. "Luna helped him through the loneliness and we're grateful he found love here, but his heart always belonged to you." Luna approached Sarah with gentle dignity, as if formally presenting her remaining puppies, Scout's siblings. The beautiful mother dog seemed to understand that this reunion was bigger than all of them, and she gracefully accepted that part of her family would be leaving. "What about Luna and the other puppies?" Sarah asked, her heart aching at the thought of separating the family. Mrs. Johnson smiled. "Luna has a good life here and she knows it. But if you're willing, we'd love for Atlas to visit sometimes. Let the family stay connected." The drive back to Cedar Falls was filled with a joy so profound that Sarah could barely contain it. Atlas rode in the back seat, constantly nuzzling Scout and occasionally placing his large head on Sarah's shoulder as she drove. The bond between father and son was beautiful to witness. Scout had inherited not just his father's coloring and intelligence, but also his incredible capacity for love and loyalty. When they arrived at Mrs. Henderson's house, Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of continuing to her grandmother's house that night, she asked if she could stay in her childhood home's backyard with Atlas and Scout. Mrs. Henderson, understanding the magnitude of this reunion, convinced the current homeowners to let Sarah camp in the familiar space where Atlas had spent his puppyhood. As the sun set over Cedar Falls, Sarah sat in the backyard where she'd spent countless hours with Atlas as a young dog. Now, with Atlas's massive head resting on her lap and Scout curled up against her side, the circle felt complete in a way she'd never dared to hope for. "I'm never leaving you again," she whispered to Atlas, her fingers buried in his thick coat. "Both of you. We're a family now." Atlas looked up at her with those wise, forgiving eyes and gently licked her hand. In that gesture, Sarah felt not just forgiveness, but a love so pure and unconditional that it took her breath away. Scout stirred in his sleep, his tiny paw reaching out to touch both Sarah and his father, as if making sure they were all still together. The next morning, Sarah made another life-changing decision. She called her supervisor in Seattle and requested an immediate transfer to the veterinary clinic in Cedar Falls. Her grandmother needed her, and more importantly, she needed to be where her heart belonged, with the family that had never stopped believing she would come home. 3 days later, as Sarah unpacked her belongings in a small rental house with a large backyard, Atlas supervised every move while Scout played with his favorite toy, the worn red collar that had brought them all together. The house filled with the sounds of home, Atlas's contented sighs, Scout's playful yips, and Sarah's laughter as she watched her 2 boys explore their new domain. Sometimes love finds a way even when it seems impossible. Sometimes the bonds we forge are stronger than time, distance, or even the well-meaning interference of others. And sometimes a brave little puppy with his father's heart can walk 30 miles through the rain to bring a family back together. If this story moved your heart, remember that somewhere out there, a loyal companion might be waiting for their person to come home. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of love, loyalty, and second chances. Like this video if you believe in the unbreakable bond between humans and their animal families, and share it with someone who needs to remember that love always finds a way. What's your most memorable reunion story? Share it in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you.